Hi everybody, it's Will Alexander from Will Alexander's Dog Show Tips, brought to you by Canine Chronicle TV and ProPlan, nutrition that performs. If you like what we're doing here, don't forget to press the like, share, and subscribe button. A surprise for you today, a special guest, the one and only Mr. Andrew Brace. Sit back and relax and listen to some stories and some history. Hello everybody, we have Andrew Brace with us this afternoon. Hi Andrew, how are you?
I'm doing really well, all things considered.
Well, you look great. Things are good.
Thank you.
Let's just dive right into it. Tell me how you first got involved with dogs and what age were you, Andrew?
Oh gosh. Well, ever since I can remember, I had this fascination with dogs. As a small child, I was just desperate to have a dog. My parents resisted and said, well, you know, I wasn't old enough to look after one. So they held out. And eventually, when I got to 11 years of age, with our education system at the time, we had what was referred to as the 11 plus examination. And this was when kids of 11 sat an examination, and those that did well moved on to the grammar school, and those that didn't do so well went to the secondary modern school. So luckily I got into the grammar school. So my parents obviously wanted to sort of reward this academic brilliance. So, you know, do you want a new bike? Do you want a record player? Do you want a tape recorder? No, I want a dog of my own. And anyhow, I could be quite a persistent little child, I suppose. And they eventually they agreed. So we then had to decide on a breed. Well, you know, like countless other kids of my generation, I mean, I grew up on the Lassie films, so it had to be a rough collie. No, you can't have a rough collie because a rough collie is too big. Okay, so I started doing some research and I discovered there was a breed called the Shetland Sheepdog, which was basically a miniature rough collie. So we were going to have a Shetland Sheepdog. And then one fateful day, I went to the dentist's. My mother took me to the dentist's. And when I was sat in the surgery in the dentist's chair waiting for the dentist to come in, there was a medical rep who was calling on him, and we were just chatting along, making small talk. And somehow dogs crept up into the conversation even then. And he reached into his wallet and so proudly showed me this photograph of his pet boxer. And I took one look at this boxer and I thought, we're not having a Shetland Sheepdog. So when I came out to the waiting room to my mother, I said, by the way, I changed my mind. We're not having a Shetland Sheepdog, we're having a boxer. So she said, but a boxer's as big as a rough collie. So anyhow, I got my boxer. And obviously it was a pet dog. I mean, dog shows, you know, weren't in the equation at that point. So we tracked down some local breeders, and they had a male puppy for sale, 8 weeks, for 18 guineas, 18 pounds and 18 shillings, who they hadn't actually bred him. He was like a pick of litter puppy that had come back from a very successful stud dog they had. The people concerned, he was the chairman and she was the secretary of the South Wales Boxer Club. So they made sure that I became a junior member of the South Wales Boxer Club. And off I went with my pet boxer, as happy as Larry. And all my pocket money was then spent on buying boxer books. And I was just so immersed in the whole thing. And then before school and after school, I would take the dog to the local park, you know, walk him on the lead, give him a lot of free running. And one day I was coming back from the park and there was a guy mowing his front lawn who called over and said, oh, you have a boxer? Yeah, so anyhow, we got into conversation. And it turned out that he and his wife had, in the past, shown boxers. They didn't have any left. They just had an old Boston Terrier and an old Bulldog. But what they did have was a pile of British Boxer Club yearbooks and Dog World annuals. So every time I went to the park, I used to call in and spend hours just looking at their dog books. And I happened to mention to this guy, his name was Granville Rawlings, that having read, you know, the boxer books that I had, and I'd studied this thing called the breed standard, and measured my pride and joy up against it. And I mean, clearly this dog was a champion. So I better show him, you know, because he was like perfect. So he looked at me a little strangely. Anyhow, a few days later, my father came back from work. He was a retail pharmacist. Came back from work one evening and he said, oh, I've had a telephone call from this guy, Granville Rawlings, who you've been calling on. And he tells me that you want to show Bruce. So I said, yeah, that's the plan. So Granville, of course, had rung my dad to tactfully explain to him that Bruce was only in possession of one of what he should have had two of. He obviously didn't feel it was his position to start discussing testicles with an 11-year-old boy. So anyhow, this led into my dad having, you know, the father-son birds and the bees talk. Not that it did a lot of good, but anyhow. So poor old Bruce never did get to see the inside of a show ring. But I went to the South Wales Boxer shows where they made me honorary veterinary steward, because in those days, every single dog had to be vetted in, you know, before they were admitted to the show. And, you know, I felt so important. I mean, I could actually hold the soap and towel for the club vet, you know, it was a really big deal. And then some friends of the people from whom we bought the original boxer had been in boxers originally. But she was now very successful in Boston Terriers. And very close to my home, we had one of these huge agricultural shows, which were very, you know, numerous in those days, where you had, you know, cattle and sheep and cows and poultry and a dog section. And anyhow, I went along to the dog section, and Betty Mabley Parker, her name was, she was there. And she said, would you like, she had a champion dog, a dog called Mabrock's Mr. Wonderful. She said, would you like to show Mickey, as he was called, in the child handling class, as it was then referred to? Yeah, of course. I mean, great. So I actually debuted with a champion Boston Terrier. That was the first time I'd ever had a dog in a show ring. And yeah, look, it was a champion dog. He was schooled to perfection. All I had to do was stand there really and just bait the dog, you know. I mean, I'd been schooled beforehand. And I got second behind a diminutive, ringleted blonde girl in a pink fluffy skirt, who was dragged around the ring by a Pyrenean mountain dog, completely out of control. And that beat me into second place. And I felt a little aggrieved, to be honest. To
this day.
But anyhow, I mean, the show bug had bitten, basically. Bruce lived to a reasonably old age. And then when he died, you know, I said to parents, well, you know, we've got to have another dog. So they said, well, that's okay, but your sister should choose the breed. I have one sister, 3 years younger than myself. So by now I've become fascinated with all the brachycephalic breeds. I mean, I just had a thing for flat faces for some reason. So my mission then was to brainwash my sister into believing that she couldn't live without a Pekingese. And eventually the first Pekingese moved in, and I showed him with relative success, considering that this was the heyday of the breed and you had huge classes. And I mean, he never won CCs or anything, but you know, he did jolly well at he won loads of special beginners classes at championship shows. By now, I think, you know, parents were beginning to accept that this disease wasn't going to go away. And you see, one of the problems that bothered my mother was the fact that my maternal grandfather, her father, had actually shown wire fox terriers. Okay. And my mother was dragged around dog shows as a small child, until she was extremely bored with them. And I mean, when I showed an interest in showing dogs, it was a question of, oh God, not again. I mean, my grandfather had actually retired from showing before I was born, so there was no direct connection, but maybe there was some kind of genetic element. And then fast forward a little bit, before we knew where we are, I had a small kennel set up in the garden, and you know, there were like 12 Pekingese there, and I was doing, you know, I was doing a lot of I bought quite a number of Peaks locally, showed them a little bit, sold them on, made a little bit of money to keep the dogs going, and that's basically how it started. And it was the Pekingese breed that actually gave me my first champion.
So, who would you consider your mentors then? Consider the woman that got you boxers at the dog shows into the one show, or later on in Pekingese?
Well, I mean, I never really made any great inroads in boxers. I did subsequently, I mean, before the Peak thing started, I had actually befriended a local boxer breeder who would let me have two bitches on breeding terms, which I co-owned with friends locally, and we bred a couple of litters. But I mean, it wasn't sort of remarkable, you know, by any stretch. But I was very fortunate that, you know, when I was quite young, I actually got introduced to, and for some reason they took to me, Mr. and Mrs. Wilson Wiley, who had the Wardrobes boxers, who for years were like, you know, legends. I mean, Connie and Wilson Wiley, you know, Wilson wrote books on the breed. Their kennel, you know, produced countless champions and best in show winners. I mean, they were the top. They didn't live near to me. They lived in Buckinghamshire. But they kind of befriended me, and I mean, they were terribly helpful, you know, with the book. And I mean, latterly, you know, we became quite friends, and you know, when I got older, you know, we socialized, and I mean, they were marvelous people. Connie had a great background in horses, and I think she was the first example that made me realize how a background in horses makes so many dog people great.
Oh, there's no question.
Because they seem to have a totally different understanding of construction and movement and functionability. And you know, I've been aware of several examples since, but I mean, Connie was the first one. So if there was a boxer mentor, it would probably been the Wileys. along with several other boxer breeders in the southwest of England, because every summer I went for a month's holiday to some cousins of mine who lived in the southwest, which was a real hotbed of boxer kennels. He dragged me around every boxer kennel in the county. And these poor people, I mean, they got fed up, I think, with this kid, with his endless questions. And but, you know, they were all very, very accommodating. And it was a great grounding. But as far as the Pekingese were concerned, again, very early on, I had the good fortune to meet, and we just gelled with Yvonne Bentinck, who was at one time chairman of the ladies' branch of the Kennel Club, when the ladies were like a separate entity to the Kennel Club. And Eve kind of took me under her wing. She was a complete mix, but she was I mean, she could be an absolute tyrant, and many people were terrified of her. But if she took to someone, I mean, she would just do anything for you. And I mean, I'm the first to realize that if it hadn't been for Eve's interest and support, I would never, ever have been able to award challenge certificates in Pekingese in 1977 when I was 25 years of age, because this breed was the province of old ladies and wealthy gentlemen. And, you know, they had this child coming in to judge a championship show, which didn't go down too well in some quarters.
I'm sure.
But you're talking of mentorship. I mean, obviously, it's going to come as no surprise to you that, you know, my overall mentor in dogs, in Pekingese, and in life was, of course, Nigel. And strangely, although Nigel was born just miles away from where I grew up, we didn't actually meet until he'd emigrated to Canada.
Okay, wow.
And the first time I actually met him, he was judging you know, we have little open shows, one step down from championship show, and there was an open show in Neath Town Hall, and I was showing that very first Pekingese I was telling you about.
How old were you then?
I would have been late teens, old enough to drive, so I guess 18 or 19. And I had this first Pekingese who was still a puppy. He was under 12 months. And at the time, I was also handling an Afghan hound for some friends of mine. And Nigel gave the Pekingese best of breed in quite a reasonable entry. And he was only like 10 months old, which was huge for me. You know, this was Nigel Aubrey-Jones. But then everyone was assuming that Best in Show would go to a very, very spectacular and beautiful Great Dane bitch, who had many, many CCs and many Best in Show. And Nigel made the Afghan Best in Show over the Great Dane.
And you were showing it?
And I was handling it. And from there on in, you know, we became friends. Even though he was in Canada, you know, we corresponded regularly. He took an interest in me. There's no question about it. And of course, in those days, I mean, he and Bill were coming over regularly, you know, 4 or 5 times a year. And of course, whenever he came back to visit his father, who was a marvelous, marvelous old stockman dog breeder. But to put it tactfully, let's just say that Nigel's dad's housekeeping wasn't the best. And I mean, every time I visited, it was a question of, you know, before you get in through the front door, you'd have to kick several sort of solidified dog turds out of the way before you could actually get to the front door. So anyhow, Nigel never ever stayed with his dad. He always stayed with me when he was visiting. And, you know, he taught me so much because he was, you know, he didn't package things up, as you well know. And he was, whilst he was my greatest supporter, he was also my greatest critic. And he
goes hand in hand, I think.
Sorry?
That goes hand in hand, I think.
Yeah, I mean, he, and it was always done with the best of intentions. But I mean, I'll never forget him, you know, before I knew him that well, I was judging, it was probably about the third time I'd done Pekingese in the UK. And he was at the show, and he sat and he watched. And I'd finished judging, and he came over to me and he said, you and I are going to the bar. Well, you know, you don't say no, do you? And he just came out to that, and he said, you know, I've been watching you, and he said, you're a young man. He said, you've got an awful lot of talent, but he said, you're a young man in a hurry. And he said, you're at the stage in your life when you want to do it all tomorrow. And if you're not careful, you might take the wrong turning just to get there quicker. And I had this lecture about how there was only one way to do it. And, you know, I remember coming out to the bar, and on the way home, I traveled there with a very good friend of mine, Ann Winter, who had Pomeranians. And I said, my God, you know, that Nigel really gave it to me. But, you know, everything he said made me think. And I really do think that I might, without Nigel's intervention, I could have been tempted, you know, to start playing politics and maybe taking shortcuts, because I was now desperate, you know, to get there and do it. But thank God, you know, he was there, and he always was there for me. And there is not a single day goes by and I don't miss him.
I'm sure. It was unbelievable.
I mean, he was just, and as he said, you know, it wasn't just Pekingese and dogs, just life in general. He was, you know, he had so much wisdom. And I mean, of course, I love that. I mean, I love the personality and the character because, you know, as you know, I mean, he didn't give a shit. You know, I mean, Nigel, you know, he'd give it you.
And he did.
And, you know, he could be, I mean, I've seen him in the company of several people when he's just shredded people. Absolutely. And amusingly, sometimes they hadn't even realized they'd been shredded. But he was amazing. The biggest influence on my life ever. And of course, I mean, after his death, you know, he said to me, you know, long before he died, he said, when I go, he said, promise me you'll keep an eye on Bill. And, you know, I rang Bill every week.
Yeah.
And I mean, Mr. Taylor, God rest his soul, he was one of those people that figured that the telephone was an invention that only worked one way. So I rang Bill. It was very seldom I got a call back, but I called him every week, as I promised Nine Eyes.
So, no, I love hearing this about Bill and Nigel. Did Nigel ever give you any background information on himself, on how he started at dog shows? You told me his dad was a stockman, obviously, so he got into dogs that way.
Well, I mean, Milton was an amazing man. He was a civil servant.
What breed did he have?
Well, this was it. He was a civil servant. He had a couple of Pekingese, but he also had an interest in terriers. And he would, I mean, after, because Nigel left home very early, to go off and do his thing. I mean, Nigel went off very young. and spent time with various luminaries of the dog world. But Milton he had an incredible eye. I mean, he would see a Welsh Terrier untrimmed walking up the high street in Aberdeen and think, well, you know, that's got something about it. Take it home and trim it. And over a period of months, it would acquire a pedigree magically. And the next thing you knew, you know, Nigel had it in the States. No, I mean, his father was Milton. I used to go up to Milton regularly because if ever I had, you know, a bitch and I was having problems getting her mated, you know, if Milton couldn't make two dogs, nobody could. I mean, he was brilliant at stud work, and he had. I think he sort of considered himself a sort of new age apothecary or something, because the house, incidentally, the house that he was living in when I first met him was a house called Abernant Groes. It was a grand detached house in about an acre of ground. That house Nigel bought for his parents with the money that he got when he sold St Aubrey Judy of Calatha to Mrs Venables.
Wow. That's incredible.
He had enough money to buy his parents this wonderful detached house. But anyhow, in the sort of living room, they had an open range, open coal fire. And of course, one of the reasons that the house always stunk, it wasn't necessarily dog shit. It was because on this open range, Milton always had a huge cauldron of fish heads and flaked maize bubbling away. Because if your dog had eczema or slipping patellas, fish heads and flaked maize would sort it. That was Milton's kind of cure-all. And then, of course, when Nigel was, he spent some time with Bill Hindley Taylor, who had the Cairo Pekingese. He spent some time at Joe Braddon's place. And all the time he was, you know, doing a little bit of buying and selling because, you know, Nigel was a great one for making a buck, as we all know.
Yeah.
But I mean, of course, the story of Nigel and Bill's meeting is legendary. I mean, you don't even need me to.
No, I want to hear it. Let's hear it.
Well, Nigel was still at home breeding Pekingese. And breeding and buying, and Bill had just started. Bill had his very first Pekingese, and had bred his very first litter. And Bill used to tell this story himself, to his own detriment, and sending himself up mercilessly. Having bred one litter of pet Pekingese, young Mr. Taylor, who had registered his Elsdon kennel name, had produced his own kennel stationery, which was lavender notepaper, gold embossed, and the heading on the notepaper was Elsdon, where Pekingese breeding is still an art. And he bred one litter of pets. So, apparently, at some show, I don't know whether it was in the States or Canada, Bill had come across a gentleman called John Royce, who was quite big in Pekingese. And this John Royce was aware of Nigel. I'm not quite sure how or whatever, or whether they bought and sold dogs, but Anyhow, Mr. Royce suggested that Mr. Taylor should write to Mr. Aubrey Jones, and maybe they could be pen pals. And Bill duly wrote to Nigel, introducing himself and I mean, you know, Bill's handwriting was just immaculate, wasn't it? on his lavender notepaper, enclosing a photograph of himself. Well, you can imagine. Mr. Aubrey Jones had thought he'd landed himself this millionaire film star. They were pen pals. They corresponded for some time. And eventually Bill came to South Wales. It was supposedly on a return ticket, but he actually stayed initially for 3 years. Wow. So, and there were some very, very entertaining stories of Nigel and Bill living together at Abernanthy Groes with Nigel as dad, but none of them are suitable for family viewing.
Thank you. Incredible times, though. My gosh.
They were, and I mean, they were, you know, I mean, you saw more of them than I did, but I mean, they were just, it was such a fantastic combination because they, you know, they were polar opposites in so many ways, and yet there was that common thread and common goal, and you know, that they were. I've never met two people who were so utterly devoted to each other. I mean, it was, you know, it was incredible to see. And I mean, to this day, you know, when I've done judging presentations, you know, I find myself quoting Nigel so often. You know, very little of it is original thought on my part. And just these odd little pearls that flood back. I mean, you know, the best bit of advice Nigel ever gave me was, every time you step in the middle of the ring, judge as if this is your retirement show and the show that you want everyone to remember you for. Because he said far too many people go in the ring and think, well, today I'm going to bend a little bit because it suits me because of X, Y, or Z, but next week I'll do it right. And he says, once you've done it wrong, you never do it right.
That's great advice. It really is. Wow.
It's something I always pass on. And then, of course, there's the classic, which I mean, I've trotted out in 100 articles over the years. You know, define quality. Quality is the difference between pottery and porcelain.
Yes, I remember that one now.
I mean, you know, how simple, but how beautiful.
Yeah.
Marvelous, marvelous.
That's great.
Incidentally, talking of Canadians, I told you I ramble a little bit. Have you noticed that?
Yes.
That, not that you can see it on cam, but that is actually a piece of pyrography, you know, burnt into the wood and coloured, which was a gift from Garrett Lambert when he came to stay many years ago.
Man.
And it's Ada, my famous Beagle bitch, and it's one of my most treasured possessions, dear Garrett.
Yeah, I have a picture that actually Allison's mom painted for me of Garrett and Sonny on the dock.
The famous picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That one. Oh my gosh. Okay. We go on forever about Garrett now too.
Yeah. Well, we better stick on some kind of track, I think.
Yes. Although I'm sure people will love it. Okay. So I guess Pekingese are your favorite breed, even to this day.
Pekingese have a special place in my heart. I mean, I love the Peaks. Of course, coming back to Nigel, I mean, I spent a week typing every word of the Pekingese book on the kitchen table. And of course, he produced this marvelous book on the breed. But every word was typed on an old-fashioned typewriter on the kitchen, not at Twin Ponds, at the other house. Are they my favourite breed? I mean, they have a special place in my heart. But you know, boxers, I have to say, probably.
Really? Wow.
I keep on coming back to boxers. I keep on coming back to boxers.
When did Beagles come into the mix then?
Well, that was a funny story again. I mean, I was showing the Pekingese at a few championship shows and all the local shows, and I mean, I was aware of Beagles, but the kind of Beagles that we saw were a little bit kind of fine-boned, snipey-faced, not particularly attractive in expression, you know, a little bit kind of flat, a little bit sort of underdone. And I was at a local open show one day, and a lady called Renee Davis came into an any variety puppy class with a 6-month-old beagle bitch called Imdi Amy. And I just stopped in my tracks. I mean, I have never seen anything so beautiful in all my life. She had this exquisite headpiece, you know, with a beautifully finished muzzle, the softest expression, you know, bone that went down to the ground with the tightest feet. She was compact. She had a level top line, a perfect tail set, as smart as paint, showing her head off. And I thought, my God, if beagles can look like that, I want a beagle. So I checked her out, and she had been sired by an American dog that Douglas Appleton had imported called Apolline Valladay's Happy Fella, who not only sired that bitch, but more importantly, sired a dog for Marion Spavin called Champion Dial and Gamble. And Gamble was the dog who changed the breed. I mean, you could make Gamble to a Jersey cow and produce a champion beagle. I mean, it was marvelous. So I tracked down a local breeder, Veronica Bradley, and I bought a grandson of Happy Fella. And it all started from there, really. But, you know, when you were talking earlier about mentors and Nigel and whatever, I mean, I consider myself very fortunate because, you know, we had a lot of substantial people around that were of that generation that took an interest in young people. You know, because I didn't have a dog of my own to show, I used to steward a lot, you know, ring steward for a lot of these all-rounders. And so many of them, you know, if they could see that you were interested, they really would, you know, give you their time. Someone who became, you know, a close personal friend in time was Gwen Broadley, who had the Sandylands Labradors, who was the most marvelous judge, and you know, supreme breeder, and thankfully, I mean, the kennel is still going through Erica Jays, who worked for Gwen since she was a schoolgirl and inherited the kennel, and she's producing Sandylands now, just of the type that Gwen would have loved. But I mean, Gwen was, you know, I remember going to the very first Labrador club show specialty I ever went to was the Labrador Club of Wales. It was in the days when she was still Mrs. Broadley. And I said, well, you know, would you mind if I sat with you? And we sat from minor puppy dog through to open bitch. And she just discussed all the dogs. And I mean, that was, you know, that was worth 100 breed seminars.
Exactly. You can't get that education. Wow.
And I mean, because of the kind of person she was, even when she was being critical of a dog, she did it so nicely. You know, she had a way with her. I mean, Gwen was much loved by many people and by many generations. I mean, she was a wonderful, wonderful person.
That reminds me a bit of Mr. Eldridge. He was always that way too. He had a way of telling you a dog he was not fond of, but he was never mean about it. You know.
Yeah. And of course, let's not forget that. I mean, I don't know whether it would sort of fall into the category of mentorship, but you know, I spent 2 years, obviously later down the line. I spent 2 years working on the International Encyclopedia of Dogs with Mrs. Clark. And I mean, that was an education.
Sure, that was.
It really was. I mean, I'd met the lady once or twice. I mean, I didn't know her that well. I had actually, I'd interviewed her when she came over to judge the Norfolk Terrier Club show. I interviewed her in front of a sort of live audience. And without question, the most complex character I've ever met. I mean, she was an utter conundrum. And it was very interesting, you know, when I was doing the interview and sort of taking her back to her childhood. You know, this galleon of a woman suddenly became this very, very self-conscious, gawky teenager again. And she opened up marvelously and basically said that, you know, that the image that became Annie Clark was very much an invention of her husband, Jim. Because it was Jim who gave her the confidence, and Jim who pushed her, and Jim who sort of made her this substantial person that she was. Because in so many ways, she was actually, you know, not that many people would believe it, but she was actually rather a shy, self-conscious kind of person.
You would never guess that.
No. I mean, she was a total contradiction. But going back to the encyclopedia, I mean, it taught me so many things about, you know, what you're looking for, because we were selecting the pictures for the book. So, you know, we were toing and froing thousands and thousands of pictures. And I mean, I learned very, very early on, like within weeks, never ever send Annie a picture of a dog with its feet in the grass. If you can't see it, no matter how beautiful the picture is, if you can't see its feet, bin it. She just would not take the photograph if you couldn't see the feet. And I mean, you know, Mr. Sabella tells many stories of Annie when she was handling the poodles, how she would set a dog up and neatly pick the grass from around the front of its feet, drawing the judge's attention to its impeccable feet. And of course, you know, we're back to mentors again. I mean, Sabella, you know, I mean, he's been a huge part of my life, because when I was in school, my school chums had footballers and pop stars on their bedroom wall. I had a blow up of this bronze god in a white vest on Malamu Beach with a white standard poodle in midair. And I mean, that was just, you know, that was my god. And I mean, little did I ever think that we'd meet, let alone become friends. And of course, when I launched Dogs Monthly, the monthly magazine, Mr. Sabella was coming over to judge the finals of the Pup of the Year at Crufts. So I called Nigel and I said, look, I don't know whether there's any chance, but Frank Sabella is coming to do the finals. I would love to interview him for the magazine. Leave it to me, says Nigel. Not 15 minutes later, my phone goes and there's an American accent. Is that you, Andrew? Yes. Who's this? This is Frank. Frank who? Well, Frank Sabella, for fuck's sake. And I mean, I was, for once in my life, totally tongue-tied. My knees had turned to jelly. I had the bronze god on the end of the phone. He just called me Andrew. I mean, it took me 10 minutes to regain my composure. But you know, we did the interview as planned. And I mean, from that day on, I was just mesmerized by it. Because with Frank, I mean, very much like Nigel, you know, the pearls just drop from their lips, don't they? And you want to rewind every moment. You know, I mean, I said to him once, so, you know, what's the first thing you look at he says, when a dog walks into my ring, I need it to scream its breed. Then he said, we can start analyzing things. I mean, he's such a character. I owe him a phone call. I should call. I haven't spoken to him for about 3 months. I should call him. Right. Have I gone off track a little here?
No, it's okay. It's perfect. I love it.
Probably.
Judging. Let's get to judging. When did you first start judging? You did tell me you were like 25.
Well, you've got to remember that the way we did it in this country in those days, I mean, I was very fortunate in that I grew up in South Wales, which was a hotbed of, you know, quite successful dog people. But locally, in the evening, lots of different clubs held dog matches. And a dog match is basically when, I mean, the Kennel Club rules at the time said it should be a maximum of 32 dogs. In reality, there were more like 60. Where basically one judge judged all the dogs, but they were judged in pairs. So it was a basic pyramid system. So you judged a pair, the winner went forward into the next round, the winner went forward into the next round, until you end up with one dog, and they were judged as puppies and adults. And of course, in those days, you've got to remember, there was no such thing as ringcraft. This is where the successful breeders took their puppies to train them.
Yeah.
To these dog matches. So I started off judging dog matches. And of course it was great because, you know, you had such a huge variety of breeds and a lot of, you know, really significant people. So that's where I sort of cut my teeth. I mean, today it tends to be, you know, you start judging immediately with your breed. I mean, personally, I think that sort of variety grounding at the very first level, I think gives you a great kind of basis. So then you progress to the open shows. And I mean, what would happen, not like today where you have to get on club judging lists or enroll for this and that. In those days, if you were out showing good dogs, the sort of senior people in the breed would watch you and think, well, maybe, you know, maybe he should try his hand at judging. And I mean, they got little open shows for you. And they often went and watched. And I mean, if you did a good job, then it led to other things. You know, the whole thing was done much more informally.
And it seemed a lot of common sense too, so.
But it wasn't any the worse for that, Will, because judging is not it's not a science. It's more of an art. It's not an academic thing. Some of the greatest judges of our time, you know, were bordering on illiterate. But they, you know, they had that instinctive feel. So I mean, I progressed. I did the open shows, and then you would judge. In my case with the Pekingese, I think I judged 2 or 3 Pekingese club open shows. And then it was thanks to Eve Benting that I got my first championship show in 1977, as I said, when I was 25. And then somebody gave me, it was Leslie Page, who was a great gun dog man. And he gave me a marvelous piece of advice round about that time in my life. Because he, practically until his death, he was pigeonholed as being a gun dog man. Whereas in reality, he was a great judge of all breeds. His mother had Great Danes, but everyone thought of him as a gun dog man. And he said to me, you know, if you're interested in sort of expanding this judging thing, instead of going for another toy breed for your second breed, get involved with the breed outside that group. Because he said, then that will avoid people pigeonholing you.
Sure.
And the second breed I actually gave CCs in was Tibetan Spaniels, which I know in some places would be regarded as being in the toy group. But I mean, with us, they're in the utility group. But it was good advice just to kind of, you know, get out of your group. And then because I'd started judging other toy breeds at open shows, I got to judge a few other breeds with CCs, to such an extent that 77 I did the first CCs. I actually judged my first toy group in 1981, which was just 4 years later, which, I mean, it couldn't happen today. It really couldn't happen. You know, but in those days, things were a lot more lax. And, you know, we didn't have, in fact, I mean, my first toy group, it was the Bath Championship Show, which was run by Jeff Waring and his family. And he had become a very close friend. And I remember him telephoning me one night, and he says, I have good news. So I says, what's the good news? He says, the Kennel Club has approved you to judge the toy group. But I said, Jeff, I've never been invited to judge the toy group. No, he says, I know. I didn't bother inviting you just in case they turned you down and you'd have been disappointed. But he said, I assume the date will be clear. And it was.
Perfect. When did you first venture over here to judge?
Well, if we talk in the States, I think my first appointment, which would have been down to Peter, obviously, Peter Green, my older Welsh brother, and I think he got me Bucks County in the days of Dr. Dubler. So I did Bucks County, and a couple of the Delaware Water Gap.
Yeah.
I think a couple of those shows around there. I had already met in the UK Mr. and Mrs. Stevenson.
Ah, yes.
And we had mutual friends, and they you know, they were very nice to me. And lo and behold, this invitation to do Santa Barbara appeared. You know, when I was, you know, a kid, basically. And it was when, you know, their show was absolutely at its peak.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, I knew the reputation, obviously, of Santa Barbara. And I just couldn't really believe that I got it. And of course it was, I mean, it was beyond fabulous. I mean, just amazing.
What did you judge there? What?
Sorry?
Did you do the toy group there?
No, I didn't. I just did breeds. I just did breeds. And I think as far as Canada's concerned, I think it might have actually been Limestone.
Well, Garrett's show, yeah.
Which of course was down to Garrett.
Yeah, I remember that weekend. I was there. So.
Yeah, I think Limestone was probably the first venture into Canada. But of course, subsequent to that, obviously, meanwhile, I'd met Matt and Jean, and started writing for Dog News, which was an opportunity that, you know, that I was very grateful for. And I think possibly the fact that, you know, I was writing in dog news, that had given me a little bit of exposure. And I'm sure that probably helped, you know, other American assignments popping up. It certainly didn't do any harm. So yeah, I mean, you know, the American shows are always marvelous, you know, and they have so much to commend themselves, you know. And then, of course, you know, doing Westminster with the breeds that I'd been given was just, I think that was probably that day. And of course, in those days, the breeds were still in the garden.
I remember watching you do poodles, standards.
So, well, you know, I looked, before I started the breed, I looked around the ringside, and it was so intimidating because there were so many, like, giants of the sport. Not because it was me, because it was standard poodles. Let's not kid ourselves. But it was overwhelming, and I'm actually getting goosebumps as I'm talking about this. Let me tell you, because the whole day was absolutely magical. I mean, I started the day with pugs, and I was very fortunate in that my ring stewards were Susan Sprung, who of course I love and adore, and Mr. Bivin, who's someone I have the hugest respect for. And this is so goosebumps, I can't tell you.
That's excellent.
When everyone stood up and they played the national anthem, it suddenly hit me. And I just had this incredible sense of exactly what the occasion was.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was, you know, I mean, I could tear up now. But, and then I looked at these pugs and I said to Susan, I feel sick. And she said, what are you on about? I said, this is just overwhelming. She said, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. I swear to God, I didn't see the first 3 pugs. But anyhow, eventually, you know, the adrenaline kicks in. Yeah. And you get through it. And I mean, the funny thing, obviously I get all the magazines, you know, I see the win pics, and that's not to mention the pictures you get sent in the post from other countries who are visiting Westminster with photos of their dog and their handler and all the rest of it. You know, some people, you know, have no sense at all, do they? So, you know, I had a fairly heavyweight entry and a lot of dogs that I knew, you know, had done quite a lot of winning. And I could not get past this young male with a lady who, she was just like an ordinary, like, wishing no disrespect. She just looked like everybody's mum, you know, and she had sort of like a cardigan and ski pants, and you know, she went up and down the ring, and this little dog was alongside, you know, giving it his all. I mean, you know, she was no sort of slick handler. But I just thought this dog was magnificent. Anyhow, long story short, I give this dog the breed. And she didn't seem particularly excited, you know, shook her hand, gave her the ribbon, she smiled. You know, I thought, okay, I could have used a little bit more enthusiasm. And we do pictures, and I said, you know, I think your dog's absolutely beautiful. Has he, you know, has he done a lot of winning? And she says, he won the Pug National when he was 14 months old. I said, wow. So, and I said, you know, do you know who was judging that? And she said, oh, it was Mr. Bivin. So, of course, I go back to the table, and Bivin is sat there, like, with a grin this wide. quietly chuckling to himself. And I said, "You'll never guess what I've just heard." And he says, "I have a rough idea." And the next thing I know, the dog has gone to Linda Rowell, and his call name was Rufus. And she did a phenomenal amount of winning with him. I mean, you know, he was one of those pugs that you never ever forget. And of course, Linda just, you know, took him up a gear.
Sure, of course.
Marvelous. And then the standard poodle judging was probably one of the highlights of my judging career. Getting that dog and bitch, both from Canada, as it turned out.
I remember watching it. It was exciting. It was so exciting.
You know, when I said to the two handlers, obviously I've known Simon Briggs since he was like 6 years old. The lady who was showing the bitch, I had no idea who she was, and I had even less idea who the bitch was. And when I said to them, you know, "Could you just let both the dogs face me on a loose lead?" And that bitch just sort of arched her neck and adjusted her front and sort of looked down her nose as if I was just something she'd trodden in. And my good friend Nicholas Canalis from Greece, who had traveled to the show with me, at this point he explained to the ringside, he said, "The bitch is getting the breed." Because, I mean, he can read me like a book. And of course it was Spitfire, who was just beyond magnificent, with Sarah Riedel.
Yep.
Perchik, is she now?
Yep.
I think she's Perchik now. And I mean, it was quite funny because when I left the Standard Poodles, I was on my way to lunch, and I had to walk past Mr. Sabella's Afghan ring, and he noticed me walking past, and he was just about to sort of go over an Afghan, and he kind of just left this Afghan suspended in midair, came over and said, "Who did you put up in Standard Poodles?" And I said, "A black bitch, I believe she's called Spitfire." He said, "I love you more than ever," and then just went back to going over this Afghan. He was obviously a big fan of the bitch, but she was exquisite.
No question. That was a very exciting show to watch. Sure. I can still remember. I have big goosebumps too now. So
good.
So, what about, okay, how about dogs that you wished you could have owned?
Dogs that I wished I could have owned. I'd be quite honest. You know, we were talking about Standard Poodles. If I had the expertise at presenting and handling that Jason Lynn does, it would be Ricky, Afterglow Maverick Sabre, the Standard Poodle, who was just magical. I mean, the performance of that dog with Jason at when he went best in show at Crufts, and when Jason handled him in the group at Westminster, I mean, you know, it brought tears to your eyes. And I mean, the dog himself was such a wonderful, wonderful person. But that would not be practical because I could neither present nor handle a Standard Poodle properly. On a totally practical level, a dog that I wished I could have owned, and a dog that I tried very hard to own, when I was showing my Mikey dog, the Dial-in Tolliver drag band, who was Ada's grandson, who did a hell of a lot of winning. And he was getting a lot of bitches, and there were a lot of very, very beautiful daughters of his. But we didn't really have anywhere to go with them. And I and several Beagle friends went to the Beagle National in, I think it was held in, would it be South Carolina? Does that make sense?
Good problem. Could be, yeah.
And my main reason for going was to find a male to bring back to use over the Mikey daughters. And I was outside, and it was, you know, where all the motorhomes and everything were parked up. And I saw in an X-Pen a tricolour male just standing there with no people around. And he just stood there. And I thought, my God, this is the dog I want. So I waited for the owners to come back. It turned out to be John and Peggy Shaw. And I introduced myself and said, look, you know, tell me something about this dog. And it was a young dog that they were specialing. His name was Shaw, Spirit of the Chase. So I said, look, you know, could I see him walk? Sure. I mean, the nicest people. I mean, lovely, lovely people. And I said, is there any chance that you consider selling the dog? And they said, no. And I said, well, you know, I really need a dog, you know, for all these pictures that Mikey's produced. And, you know, I could see I was getting nowhere. So I said, well, okay, you know, I totally understand that you don't want to sell this dog. And of course, he went on to be a phenomenal sire for them. I couldn't tell you how many champions he produced, but you know, I could quite understand why they didn't want to let him go. And I mean, the dog did so well for them. But so the closest thing I could do was, I did actually buy a Beagle bitch in the States, which I had bred to chase. The plan was to bring something back from that, but there were a couple of champions in the litter, but it wasn't. There was nothing there that quite what I wanted, and certainly I didn't have another chase. So, but yeah, I would love to have owned that dog.
Yeah, those are both wonderful dogs. Well, all your times judging, Andrew, have you come across, I'm sure you have, plenty of times, just because it's your nature, there must have been some humorous events that happened while you were judging, or that even you instigated whilst you were judging.
Yeah. There are several amusing ones. I'll try to think of the most repeatable ones. Okay. Many people will be aware of the fact that I am not a lover of over-presenting breeds. I'm talking about the coated breeds. Mm. And I was judging in an Asian country, and I am well aware that some of these poodle handlers are very, very clever when it comes to supplementing their dog's hair supply, should we say.
Very well.
And okay, if it's done so cleverly that I can't detect it, then there's nothing I can do about it. If it's done badly and obviously, then I can do something about it. So I had a toy poodle in this particular show, and it had the most obvious switch I've ever seen. I mean, it was just flopping around, you know, like the Eiffel Tower. Anyhow, I got the dog on the table, and I mean, I just put my hand on the top knot, and I mean, there was basically this little plastic sphere, you know, with no attempt to hide it. I said to the guy that was handling it, I said, what is this? And he just said to me, are you stupid? It's a hairpiece. Okay, thank you, you may leave. Like, you know, what kind of idiot was I that I didn't realize it was a hairpiece? But there have been some amusing things. If something floods into my brain box as we're talking that can be repeated, I will trot it out.
I remember a story along those lines as I was showing a standard dog at a special. I won't say who was judging, and he found all my switches, and all he did was congratulate me for being so creative.
Well, there you are.
I didn't win.
Well, there you are. Yeah, I mean, it was like, you know, I had a guy in one of the Mediterranean countries, and it was the same story. And the thing is, it was a beautiful little dog, but you know, it was piled up like this.
Yeah.
So you know, when I got the dog on the table, I said, "Look, I assume that you have hair pieces here." And he said, "Well, of course." So I said, "Okay, you have an option. You know, you can leave now, and I'll mark you absent, or you can leave. I'm going to go to the bathroom, and when I come back, you can bring your dog in with its hair as nature intended." He went. He got rid of all that hair. He came back. He won the breed. And I said, he says, "You have ruined 4 hours of my artistry." I said, "Why don't you look at it from this point of view? I could have saved you 4 hours work."
Oh, good.
And then to prove the point, I gave the dog the group.
Well, then I'm sure we have pictures of you. The picture of you giving him the group is different from somebody else giving him the group.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there are a dozen stories of that mold, believe you me.
Who do you miss the most in our world?
Well, apart from Nigel.
Yeah, since we've touched on Nigel a lot, and obviously he's a close one.
Yeah. No, I miss Nigel hugely. Hugely. Gwen Broadley, I mentioned before. You know, I wish Gwen was around. I wish we had somebody like Gwen now, that you could pick up the phone and get a common sense approach, you know, as to, you know, the bullshit that exists in the dog world today.
Garrett was my go-to for that. I used to call Garrett.
Yeah. I mean, Gwen, you know, I wish Gwen was here. Absolutely. And I mean, she would, if Gwen was around, you know, we wouldn't have a lot of the problems that we had, because she was someone that could control things.
If you've already touched on a lot of advice for judges. You've touched on some advice that Nigel had given you and Frank had given you. What other advice would you give new judges? If someone came to you and said they wanted to be a judge, what direction would you send them?
Well, the first thing would be, my first question to them would be, are you really interested in this breed? And I mean, we're assuming this is someone who's judging other than their own breed.
Yeah.
If they're starting off judging their own breed, then obviously, of course, they're interested in it. But I mean, when they start expanding, you know, they need to have an interest in the breed. And you see, I think one of the biggest flaws in the present system, which has just evolved over the years, people have lost sight of the fact that the breed ring is what matters. You know, we've arrived at a situation where the show is more important in dog show than the dog is. And yeah, listen, we all love to see spectacular groups and best in show and, you know, all the razzmatazz. But, we should not forget that this is supposedly a breeder's shop window, and it's for evaluating breeding stock. I think Michael Faulkner touched on this in his marvelous interview with yourself. I really do think that if people are going outside their own breed, first of all, do they have a genuine interest in the breed? If they do, go to breed specialty shows. Not a seminar just because you'll get a certificate at the end of the day. Go to breed specialty shows. Identify key people in the breed. Ask them nicely if you can spend time with them, or if not, visit them afterwards. And get a feel for the breed, and listen to as many established opinions as you possibly can before forming your own. But the whole focus has shifted away from the breed ring, and you're only going to redress that if you start bringing on a new generation, and I despair whether or not it's actually possible, of people who understand that it's the breed ring that matters. Do you know who Raymond Oppenheimer was? Raymond Oppenheimer was the godfather of bull terriers.
I don't know who you know of him, yes.
He was a great writer. He was for some years chairman of our Kennel Club Judges Committee. He was a genius, and he was a total obsessive. I mean, bull terriers were his life.
I remember Wayne talking about him a lot.
I'm sorry?
I remember Wayne talking about him.
Yeah. And he ran the breed with the rod of iron. What Raymond said went. I mean, there was never any misbehavior around the bull terrier ring, because if there had been, it was a finger from Mr. Oppenheimer. We do not behave like that in this breed. That's it. When Raymond was alive, no bull terrier was shown beyond 3 cc's, because he said, no, when a dog is a champion, it's a champion. You retire it and make way for the other dogs. And no one dared to go beyond 3 cc's. I mean, he was a marvelous, marvelous man. Which brings me to his theory, which is totally impractical in practice. But the reasoning behind it is absolutely wonderful. And he said, whenever anyone expresses a desire to judge, their first assignment should be that of best in show. They will have an assembled group of group winners, all of whom hopefully are of a certain level of quality. They will make their decision, and whatever they do, they can't really do any damage. When they have acquitted themselves at best in show level a few times, they can be trusted with the group. And then, if they perform well at group level, then they can be trusted with the breed. Because it's the breed that matters most, and the breed where judges can do most damage.
Yeah, what a great way.
I mean,
wow.
Marvelous way of thinking.
Yes, it really is. Huh. That's great advice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any superstitions?
I don't consider myself a superstitious person, but funnily enough, the only, if you can call it a superstition, is something that Nigel passed on to me. If ever he saw a penny piece, a coin, on the floor, if it was a penny, he would pick it up and pocket it and never spend it. He said, that's a lucky penny. And I do the same. I don't find too many pennies these days, but
No, we don't have them anymore over here. Any regrets that you had in the world of dogs?
Any regrets? Yeah, I think possibly sometimes I could have thought a little deeper before opening my mouth.
We all do that.
Because sometimes that's got me into a little trouble. But as regards the, the sort of practicalities of it, no, not really, no.
I mean, what have you been doing?
Oh no, I have thought of one regret.
Okay.
I have thought of one regret. I wished I lived close enough to Jenny Line that we could be neighbours and go for coffee and talk dogs. That is a regret. that is a regret.
I'd even serve you guys coffee just so I could listen in. Yeah. I mean, now that we have all this technology, sometimes we can watch groups, crafts or wherever, and watch the judging, but we're on Messenger, and I think she's just wonderful. I just love the way she looks at dogs and the way she sees dogs, and her attitude to the host. And we have actually joked and said, God, wouldn't it be fun if we were neighbours? So yeah, I wish Jenny and I were neighbours. That's good. That would be nice.
She'd probably get bored with me real soon.
So with all this time off with this pandemic, what have you been doing with yourself, Andrew?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I mean, as you know, 3 years ago, I put everything on hold, the travelling and the judging, to take care of my mum full time. So what I've been doing to occupy my time, I've been doing a lot of voluntary work for Age UK, driving sort of isolated seniors for hospital appointments and doctor's appointments and stuff, which is very rewarding, actually. Sure. I have to say. But of course, the pandemic has put paid to that. So the extra time that I've had has been pretty much taken up with all the other activities that have sprung up, including I know the whole online photographic dog show concept has been hugely controversial. And I can't believe the venom that it's generated in some quarters on Facebook. I mean, for God's sake,
Exactly.
But I did at one point rue the day that I said yes to John Bryson in Australia when I agreed to do his, because I had no idea that it would actually involve 800 dogs, which involved 800 critiques. So when you do 800 dogs and 800 critiques, it actually took 20 days.
Wow. Sure.
But it was very, very interesting because, all right, it is what it is. You are judging photographs, for God's sake. And I did say to John, if I agree to do it, you must publish a preamble where I emphasize the fact that judging dogs is all about getting your hands on, opening mouths, watching movement, assessing muscle tone, looking at character and attitude. This is judging photographs, so let's get the thing in perspective.
We all judged photographs when we were kids, though. I remember magazines.
But these morons on Facebook. I mean, some of these judges, all breeds judges, it is beneath our status to judge photographs. I mean, you can't believe the arrogance and pomposity of it. Did these people never ever go to breed seminars when they had to look at a slide screen? I mean, for God's sake. But what I found so interesting about it was, all right, you have to make allowances for the quality of the actual picture and whatever. But you do the best you can. But because it was literally an all-breed show, the breeds, that I wasn't judging, sort of very regularly, it might only have been four dogs with 4 pictures. But I mean, I read the breed standard before I started. And the breed standard that was applicable in Australia, obviously. So it was, it was a kind of a refresher for me, because, when you read standards, there's always a little clause that jumps out at you, that you've sort of subliminally forgotten about. So yeah, it was damned hard work, but it was interesting. And I mean, I did say to some of my friends who were so critical of it, do you not think that it's also educational? Because, everybody has access, to these photos and the critiques and whatever. So, yeah. But it's, these various things, and I did a Pekingese seminar, webinar, I think the current idiom is, for the Russian Kynological Federation. That was the marathon, because with Katya doing the translating as well,
sure.
I think it was 3 hours in total, with a PowerPoint presentation, me talking over it, her translating into Russian, the Russian translation flashing up in text. But it worked well, and it had some. I had the kindest email from Michael Hill, actually.
Oh yeah.
Who was terribly sweet about it. Yes.
Well, you've been busy.
Well, yes. I mean, we've not been bored. That's for sure.
One last question. I know it's getting late over there. If you could speak to the 20-year-old Andrew Brace, what would you say to him now?
Oh God. I would probably say, as I said earlier, think before you speak a little more. That would probably be and probably don't automatically take people at face value, because by nature, I am a very trusting person, and when I meet people, I accept them, for what they are, and unfortunately, particularly in this sport, we have a lot of people who develop friendships purely for what they can get out of them. And I think that is a source of disappointment. I mean, I'm lucky. I have, a small group of really genuine friends. But over the years, there have been quite a number who I have presumed were friends. But you realize that perhaps it was more a case of what they can get out of you than anything else.
Well, that's
and actually, it's been very interesting since I've taken a sabbatical from judging. It's amazing how the phone doesn't go quite so often.
Shame.
But as I said, I'm blessed with the group of friends that I do have, who I love dearly.
Any advice for thoughts on when you feel dog shows might start up again for us all?
Dog shows obviously are going to return. Yes. Next year. Some already have this year. I don't know to what extent there will be some kind of control. I'm talking about the pandemic-based control. My bigger concern, Will, is for the future of the sport, because I mean, 20 years ago, I came back from the US and wrote an article in the British Dog Paper. You know, I wrote for Dog World for 30 odd years. And I wrote an article warning people of the threat that the animal rights lobby represented, and that they could, in the fullness of time, see the end of dog shows. And I was branded, you know, some kind of lunatic. You know, I had no idea what I was talking about. And of course, as things have turned out, you know, this is the way we are heading. And I tend to liken it to, you know, when I was a kid, every summer we went to the circus and we watched performing animals. Now, I am not saying that having performing animals in a circus situation is necessarily a good thing, but the animal rights lobby basically closed down animal circuses. They don't exist anymore. We could well see dog shows going that way. And, you know, I think the American Kennel Club is probably doing more, you know, to fight for the sport and defend its breeders more than any other kennel club around the world. But even they've got their work cut out. And my worry is, you know, some of these European governments, you know, there was, you know, the incident last year where dog show exhibitors were fined thousands of euros because some officials arrived and discovered they trimmed the dog's whiskers. You know, this is how ridiculous it's getting. But probably not in our lifetime, but I think in the future, you could actually have a situation where the whole thing will go full circle, that dog shows under the auspices of a regulated kennel club will basically disappear, and that things will revert to completely informal gatherings of dedicated dog breeders meeting up periodically to compare breeding stock, with no rankings, no groups, no best in show, no prize money, just a genuine comparison between like-minded individuals who love their breed. It could happen. It sounds a little bit sort of science fiction, but trust me, it could happen.
Well,
and if it did, would it be so terrible?
Oh, I know. I had someone ask me earlier on this week about our sport, and I said, don't worry, there will always be dog shows. There may not be a formal dog show, but there will be me and you comparing our dog in the backyard. There will always be something.
Absolutely, yeah.
Maybe a huge reset button for us all.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, I think a lot of people are thinking long and hard. Some of my friends say, oh, well, when the first show happens, everybody's going to be there. It's going to be a record entry. I think the total reverse. I think that, you know, in the months that people have had to see how much more they've done, how much extra time they spend with their families, how they can get chores done around the house, how their bank balance has swollen ridiculously, they are actually going to say, well, hang on a minute, you know, do I really need to go back to spending that kind of money to get that kind of result? And I think that this pandemic will certainly see a lot of people drop off. I'm not talking about the hard-bitten, you know, I loathe to use the word professionals, but, you know, the really, you know, the serious hardcore people. I mean, they'll stick with it for as long as they can, obviously.
In their blood, they're not going to be able to get away now. So.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, that was great, Andrew. I got to tell you. So.
I think we must have run out of time.
We might have. We're pretty close to it. But that was great. Thank you so much for sitting down and doing this with me.
It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure. So you can...
Any final words you want to say?
Any final words I want to say? All I would say is that I am in common with so many other people. We're very, very fortunate to become involved in a sport at a young age that has given us so much. And, you know, when you think about how a love of purebred dogs has enabled us to travel the world at someone else's expense, it's allowed us to meet some of the most fascinating and eccentric characters you could ever dream of. And it's also introduced us to a huge number of truly fabulous dogs that, you know, we would never have had the opportunity to see. And, you know, I am so grateful, you know, that I got involved so young and had the help of the people I did, which enabled me to do what I've been lucky enough to do.
That was great. That was a wonderfully said. That was a great way to end this too, Andrew. I really appreciate that. All
Okay,
right. Well, you, thanks for staying up late for me. And we got...
Listen, this isn't late for me.
Okay, good.
I'm a night bird.
Again, thank you, Andrew. I really appreciate it.
Okay, you take care, Will. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Andrew, for having us into your home. That was very interesting. I'm sure everybody enjoyed themselves. Don't forget to press the like, share, and subscribe button. And if you want to send me a message or have any ideas for dog show tips, you can get a hold of me at dogshowtips@gmail.com. Or if you just want to find out what's happening in Will's world, go to willalexander.net. Until next time, guys.